Brothers and sisters of Africa, and to our brothers and sisters across the global black diaspora, today I want to speak about a strategy that many people see, but very few truly understand. When we watch the conflicts unfolding in the Middle East, we often focus on the visible battles. We see missiles, airstrikes, and headlines about wars between powerful nations. But when I study the deeper structure of these conflicts, I see something far more important than the weapons themselves. I see a network. From Gaza to Lebanon, from Iraq and Syria all the way to Yemen, a structure has slowly taken shape over decades. It is not a traditional army marching under one flag. It is a web of movements, alliances, and partnerships that can influence conflicts across an entire region. Many analysts call it Iran's hidden army. Others describe it as the axis of resistance. But what interests me is not the name. What interests me is the strategy behind it, because Iran did not conquer these territories with divisions of tanks. It did not send massive armies to occupy foreign lands. Instead, it built influence patiently through alliances, training, and long-term cooperation with movements already rooted in their own societies. And I say this clearly to Africa and to the global south. If we want to understand modern geopolitics, we must understand how power is really built. Sometimes power is not the army you deploy. Sometimes it is the network you create. To understand how this network emerged, we must first understand the institution that helped design it. When I study the strategic behavior of states that operate under constant pressure, I notice that they rarely rely on a single method of defense. Instead, they develop layers of strategy. Iran did something similar. Inside its military structure, it created a specialized unit known as the Quds Force, a branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Unlike a conventional army that focuses mainly on protecting national borders, this force was designed with a broader mission. Its role was to build influence beyond Iran's territory and to cultivate relationships with movements across the Middle East. Through the years, the Quds Force focused on developing long-term partnerships rather than short-term military interventions. Fighters from different countries received training, military advising, and strategic guidance. Intelligence cooperation and logistical support allowed some groups to strengthen their organization and operational capabilities. But what makes this approach interesting is the patience behind it. This network was not built quickly. It took decades of political relationships, regional conflicts, and shifting alliances to gradually form the structure we see today. Some partnerships became deeply institutionalized, while others remained flexible arrangements that activated when strategic interests aligned. When we examine this carefully, we see that the goal was not simply to create militias. The goal was to create an architecture of influence that could operate across borders without requiring a traditional military occupation. And once that architecture existed, the network began expanding. Different movements in different countries gradually became connected through training, coordination, and shared strategic interests. What started as limited cooperation eventually linked forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Gaza, and later even Yemen. When we look at the map today, we begin to understand that this was never about a single battlefield. It was about shaping an entire region. When we speak about the pillars of this network, we must begin with Lebanon, because if there is one place where this strategy reached its most advanced form, it is there. Hezbollah did not begin as the powerful organization we see today. It emerged during the conflicts of the 1980s, at a time when Lebanon was already deeply affected by war, foreign intervention, and internal divisions. Over the years, the movement transformed dramatically. Through training, organization, and battlefield experience, Hezbollah evolved from a resistance group into one of the most disciplined non-state military forces in the world. When we study this transformation carefully, we see the importance of long-term strategic partnership. Iran's relationship with Hezbollah was not simply about sending weapons or financial support. It was about building a structured military and political organization capable of sustaining itself over time. Training programs helped develop professional command structures. Fighters gained experience in different conflicts. Military doctrine evolved, allowing Hezbollah to combine guerrilla tactics with more conventional forms of warfare. Today, Hezbollah possesses a large arsenal of missiles and a highly organized command system. Its presence along Israel's northern border has created one of the most significant deterrent forces in the region. But there is another lesson here that we in Africa must observe closely. Hezbollah did not become powerful overnight. Its strength came from years of discipline, organization, and the ability to embed itself deeply within its own society while maintaining strong alliances beyond its borders. This is why Lebanon became such an important pillar of the broader network, because once a movement achieves that level of organization, it no longer operates only as a local force. It becomes a strategic actor capable of influencing the balance of power across an entire region. And Lebanon was only the beginning, because further east, another critical theater was emerging: Iraq. After Lebanon, the next critical theater in this network lies further east, in Iraq and Syria. When we study the map of the Middle East carefully, we begin to understand why these two countries became so important. Geography alone explains part of the answer. Iraq sits between Iran and the Arab world, while Syria connects Iraq to Lebanon and the Mediterranean coast. Together they form a corridor that links several parts of the region. Whoever maintains influence across this corridor gains a powerful strategic advantage. Over the years, Iraq became home to several militia groups that emerged during periods of conflict and instability. Some of these groups later became part of the Popular Mobilization Forces, which played a major role in the fight against ISIS. Through training, coordination, and political relationships, some of these forces developed close ties with Iran. But what we must understand is that Iraq is not simply a battlefield. It is also a bridge. Through Iraq, different elements of the regional network can connect with each other, allowing movement of personnel, equipment, and strategic coordination across borders. Syria then became the next crucial link in this chain. When the Syrian civil war erupted, the country quickly turned into one of the most complex battlefields in modern geopolitics. Many regional and international powers entered the conflict, each supporting different factions and pursuing their own strategic interests. Iran chose to support the Syrian government and coordinate with several allied militias operating on the ground. By maintaining influence in Syria, the broader network could remain connected from Iran to Iraq and eventually to Lebanon. When we step back and observe the entire corridor, we begin to see its importance. This is not simply about individual conflicts inside Iraq or Syria. It is about maintaining a continuous line of strategic influence across multiple countries. And once such a corridor exists, the network can extend even further, because the next front lies along the Mediterranean's most volatile conflict zone, Gaza. Now we arrive at one of the most sensitive fronts in the entire Middle East, Gaza. When we speak about Gaza, we are speaking about a territory that has lived under continuous tension for decades. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has shaped the political and military reality of this small strip of land, making it one of the most watched battlefields in the world. But when I examine the broader regional picture, I do not look at Gaza only as a local conflict. I look at how it fits into the larger strategic environment of the Middle East. Several Palestinian armed movements operate in Gaza, each with its own leadership, political calculations, and historical roots. Over the years, some of these groups developed varying levels of cooperation with Iran. This cooperation has included financial assistance, training, and the transfer of certain technological knowledge related to weapon systems. However, we must also understand that these relationships are not identical to the ones we see in Lebanon or Iraq. Palestinian movements remain primarily focused on their own national struggle. Their decisions are shaped first by the realities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Even so, Gaza still forms an important front within the wider regional landscape, because when major escalations occur there, the consequences rarely remain confined to a single territory. Tensions in Gaza can quickly influence political and military calculations across several countries in the region. This is why analysts often describe Gaza as a pressure point. It is a place where local conflict can intersect with wider regional dynamics. And when we connect Gaza to the other theaters we have already discussed, Lebanon to the north, Iraq and Syria forming a corridor to the east, we begin to see how multiple fronts can exist within the same strategic system. But the network does not end there. Because if we follow the map further south, another conflict zone appears, one that sits along one of the most important maritime routes in the world, Yemen. If we continue following the map southward, we arrive at another crucial front in this regional landscape, Yemen. At first glance, Yemen may seem distant from the other conflicts we have discussed, but when we examine the strategic geography of the region, its importance becomes immediately clear. Yemen sits near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the most vital maritime choke points in the world. Every year, enormous volumes of global trade and energy shipments pass through these waters. Whoever influences this corridor can affect international shipping routes, energy markets, and the calculations of major powers. The Houthi movement emerged from Yemen's internal political struggles and gradually developed into a powerful military force. Over time, the group gained control of significant territory within the country, turning Yemen into one of the most complex conflicts in the Middle East. Various geopolitical analyses have pointed to growing connections between the Houthis and Iran over the years. These relationships have reportedly included military advising, technological assistance, and other forms of strategic cooperation. What matters here is not only the internal dynamics of Yemen itself. What matters is how this conflict interacts with the broader regional network. When the Houthis developed missile and drone capabilities, the nature of the conflict began to change. These technologies allowed them to project influence beyond the immediate battlefield and affect strategic infrastructure across the region. At times, tensions connected to the Yemeni conflict have even threatened the security of major shipping lanes in the Red Sea. And when we place Yemen on the map alongside Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, and Syria, we begin to see the full scale of the structure. This network stretches across multiple fronts, land corridors, border regions, and maritime choke points. Each theater plays a different role, but together they create a system capable of shaping events across a vast geopolitical landscape. And this leads us to the final and most important question. Why was this network built in the first place? Now we arrive at the most important question. Why would a nation invest decades building such a network across multiple countries? When I study this strategy carefully, I see a lesson that many nations of the global south must understand. A country that faces stronger military powers cannot always rely on direct confrontation. If it does, the battlefield will always favor those with larger economies, bigger armies, and more advanced technology. So different methods emerge. Iran developed what many analysts describe as a strategy of indirect power. Instead of projecting influence through massive invasions, it cultivated alliances with movements already operating across the region. These groups pursued their own local struggles, but through cooperation, they also became part of a wider strategic environment. When we observe the map again, from Lebanon to Gaza, from Iraq and Syria to Yemen, we see how this network creates multiple pressure points across the Middle East. If tension rises in one area, influence can appear in another. Conflicts no longer remain isolated inside one country. A crisis in Gaza may affect security calculations in Lebanon. Instability in Yemen may influence maritime trade routes. Events in Iraq or Syria can reshape the balance across the entire corridor. This creates what strategists call multi-front leverage. For any rival considering direct confrontation, the situation becomes far more complicated. A conflict with one actor could trigger reactions across several theaters at once. Military planners must now think not about one battlefield, but about many. And this is why we, in Africa and across the global south, must study these realities carefully. Because modern geopolitics is no longer shaped only by the armies we see. It is shaped by networks, alliances, and strategic patience. Nations that understand this build influence quietly over time. And when the moment comes, that influence can reshape the balance of power across entire regions. Brothers and sisters, when we step back and observe the entire picture, we begin to understand that this story is not only about the Middle East. It is about strategy. Iran did not simply build relationships with movements across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Gaza, and Yemen. Over time, it built a structure that allows influence to travel across borders without requiring a traditional military occupation. That is what makes this system so powerful. And this is why we, in Africa and across the global south, must pay close attention. For too long, our nations were taught to measure power only by the size of our armies or the wealth of our economies. But the modern world shows us something different. Power is also built through patience, alliances, and the ability to think strategically across decades. When we study global conflicts, we are not only observing wars between distant countries, we are studying lessons about how nations defend their sovereignty in a competitive world.